My name's Gil Hova. I am a board game designer, and I'm going to tell you about indirect and zero-player interaction. So before I start, I want to remind you to please fill out the feedback forms. That's really important in deciding who gets to speak next year. So that would be really, really great if you could fill that out. Also, if we have time, we're going to have a Q&A session, though it's going to be pretty tight, so we might have to take it to a wrap-up room. Okay, fantastic. So let me tell you a bit about myself. I have 4 games, 3 of them on the market, 1 on Kickstarter. The Networks is one of my games about running a TV network. Wordsy is another one. Wordsy is a word game that rewards longer words. High Rise is on Kickstarter right now. Please back it. And Bad Medicine is a party game about pharmaceutical companies making awful drugs. I'm also co-host of the Ludology podcast with Jeff Engelstein, which is, yeah, woo! That's a real thrill to be on, but I'm not here to talk about any of that. I'm here to tell you that I am a total Care Bear when it comes to games. I don't like mean games, I don't like nasty games, except when I do, but that gets more complicated. Overall, I really do prefer games with a little less direct interaction. I mention this because I see a lot of prototypes, especially from new designers, sometimes from people totally new to game design, sometimes from people who are from the digital space, and this is their first tabletop game. And their impression a lot of times of what a tabletop game should be like is more like this. And they put in direct interaction, not because it's a conscious choice, but more because they feel like, well, this is a board game or a card game, so you need to beat up the other players, right? And that's what this talk is going to be about. We're going to talk about board and card games that don't have direct interaction, what makes them work, what makes them not work, and how they could be used as a design tool in your games. So I want to start with some clarifications because it could be really easy for me to be misunderstood. So let me get a few things out of the way. First off, at no point am I going to say that direct interaction is a bad thing. It's not. Direct interaction could be the perfect thing for your game. It's not always bad, and a lot of times it's good and it's the right choice. On the flip side, indirect interaction is not always the right choice from your game. You know, sometimes you will need that direct interaction. Clarification number 3 is we're going to focus mainly on competitive multilateral 3+ player games. Because 2-player games, interaction is very special. Any of you who have ever worked on a 2-player game, you'll know that they have a special kind of dynamic. And we're going to focus on competitive games, because cooperative games, it's a lot more subtle how interaction works in those. And lastly, we're really here to expand your designer toolbox and to open up the kinds of games that you can make so that you're not always doing the heavy metal, fry, vocal, scream all the time. How many of you attended Cole Worley's talk earlier today about king making? That was a fantastic talk. This talk is not here to contradict his talk. I think it's going to complement his talk because I think we're looking at the same thing from different angles. It's sort of the difference between a comedy and a drama in a lot of ways. So what is interaction? Interaction is, to me, the ability to affect another player's game state. So when Cole talks about king making in his games, he's talking about actually being able to affect one player being able to affect a bunch of other game states to the point that one player can decide the winner of the game, and that winner would not be them. That allows the politics of the game, the politics of the real world, and the politics of the group to start to seep through into the magic circle. And he talked about how that can actually enhance a game. And if you didn't see that talk, look it up in the vault. It's really, really good. Whereas for me, the interaction that we're going to talk about is still affecting another player's game state, but we're going to talk about how it works even when it's limited or positive or not even there at all. So I think we're going to start with this graph over here. This graph is going to help us visualize what I'm talking about here. So we've got an x-axis, which has less interaction and more interaction. And then we've got a y-axis, which is positive interaction and negative interaction in games. So let's look at some sample games here. We're going to start with Milborn, the classic Take That game. This is actually the first Take That game out there. You can play a card on someone because you're all racing cars. It's like a distance race. So you can play cards to show how far you race, but then you can play cards on other people to tell them you can't go faster than this. So there's a lot of meanness in the game. There's a lot of, as we say, take that, a lot of direct negative interaction. And again, that's there's no criticism there. That's what the game is. It's been around for decades. It's an incredibly successful game that people adore. So direct interaction and negative interaction is absolutely a feature of the game. But let's talk about positive interaction, even positive direct interaction, because you may not visualize that. So let's talk about Bonanza. Bonanza, to me, is the prototypical trading game. So this is a card game where you're trading, and the things you're trading are beans. And if you're a little skeptical about that, know that it was designed by Uwe Rosenberg, who also designed games like Agricola and Feast for Odin. This was a much earlier game of his, and it is an absolutely phenomenal game. Bonanza is just a gem, even though it is about trading beans, so it could be hard to get to the table, but once you get it to the table, man, it's fantastic. But let's talk about the positive player interaction, because you are trading beans. You get a hand of cards, and the interesting thing about Bonanza is your hand is actually a cue. You're not allowed to rearrange your hand. So you must plant the front card of your hand into one of your two bean fields in front of you. And if you have two bean fields and a totally different bean to plant into it, you've got to choose one of your bean fields to harvest. And bean fields will only give you points if you have X number of cards to harvest. And if you don't, well, too bad, you pretty much lose that bean field. So there are times when you've got a card in front of the card you want to plant, and you've got to get rid of it. How do you do that? By trading it to another player, by offering it to other players. And when it's another player's turn, trying to get rid of it before it comes around to your turn. So a trade in this game is very positive for you, and a lot of times very positive for the other player. In fact, there are times when you just want to give away your bean, not even get anything in return, because what you're getting in return is the opportunity to plant your next bean. So to me, this is a great example of positive player interaction. It's direct interaction, but you're saying you, this other player, and me, we're going to each improve our game states and try to get each of us closer to winning relative to the other players. So I think this is a great example of positive interaction, even though it's direct. So let's talk a little bit about indirect interaction. I'm going to bring up Seven Wonders. This is another absolutely wonderful game, but this is a card drafting game where the players are all simultaneously picking cards, putting the card they're chosen in front of them, and getting the effect, and then passing their entire hand to the left, and obviously getting the hand from the player to the right, and then choosing a card from there. So everybody is choosing a card one at a time and playing it, but you never actually play a card on anyone else. Your cards pretty much only affect yourself. So Seven Wonders doesn't really have a great deal of negative interaction. There's a tiny, tiny, tiny bit in that if you know the player to your left or the player to your right, if you're passing in that direction, if you know they're working for a certain kind of card, you can choose it, and there's ways to bury cards in the game to make sure they never see them. So there's a little bit of interaction, but it's not that pronounced. And there's quote-unquote military in the game, which is pretty much just if you reach a certain number of points and you're higher than your opponents, you get a bonus, and that's pretty much that. It's not really military as we would expect it mechanically in a game. So again, very much a Care Bear game, very indirect interaction. But there's all the space to the left, and what could be there? I mean, could there be anything past this? Is there anything in this little singularity on the side? So, can we have a game with zero interaction? And we can. I'm going to use Take It Easy as an example. And I love showing this game to students because a lot of these students have not actually seen games with zero interaction. And it's kind of surprising to them. They kind of assume that you have to have some sort of interaction with another player's game state. So in Take It Easy, you've got a board in front of you with a bunch of hexes, and you've got a bunch of hex tiles. And one player is going to shuffle their tiles and choose one randomly and announce what numbers are on the tile, and everybody else chooses exactly that tile because everybody has exactly the same mix of tiles. And then everybody places that tile somewhere on their board. And then that first player draws another random tile, shouts out the number, very bingo-esque, and everybody else grabs that tile and puts it on their board. And it's very quick in the game that everybody has their own setup. Everybody has placed their tiles in their own pattern. And if you arrange the tiles in a certain way, you can get a ton of points. But at no point are you interacting with the other players. You are all playing simultaneously and in your own little worlds. So when I place a tile, I cannot affect anybody else. And then once everybody fills up their boards, the game is over and you score. There is zero interaction with anyone. And with this, it's very much a feature and not at all a bug. Like, this game works beautifully because of it. And because of that, there are things that you can do with this game that you can't do with others. Like, for example, there are conventions that tell attendees, okay, everybody, if you have a copy of Take It Easy, bring it, because we're going to have a 100-player game of Take It Easy. We're going to put as many people in a room as possible, and we're all going to play exactly the same game. So one player is going to read out the numbers, and everybody's going to play along. And you can't do that in a game that has player interaction, and that totally fascinates me. Now, I show this as an example of a game with zero interaction, and there's a bunch of other games that have similar mechanisms. If you've heard of the whole roll and write movement, a lot of these games have zero or very, very indirect interaction. And again, there's things you can do in those styles of games that you can't do in others. Like, for example, I just read about a friend of mine who had a birthday party. So they got out 9 roll and write games, and they played them all simultaneously off of the same roll of the dice, which is a little mind-melting. But again, it's something you can do when you have games with very low player interaction. So this shows just the doors you can start to unlock when you have low interaction. And I'm going to throw in a couple more examples. Catan is a game that has a bunch of interaction levels. I mean, you've got positive interaction because you've got trading. You've got some negative interaction with a robber depriving people of goods. And you've got that really, really mean Monopoly card, which you can absolutely hose another player with. So I gave it a pretty big range on this board. But it trends mostly positive for this game. And then we have Munchkin. Munchkin is a game that gives you the opportunity to trade with players and negotiate with players. So there is some positive interaction, but at some point the interaction starts getting really negative really fast. And again, negative not being a downside to the game. That's what the game lives and breathes on. It really breathes off that backstabbing and betrayal. So I have friends in the Game Designers of North Carolina, and they came up with an amazing model that I really, really like, and they call it decision scales. So they've identified these 3 decision scales: personal, global, and adjacent. And I think they really help when it comes to understanding exactly what interaction is and how a move can affect another player. So prepare to be wowed by my amazing graphic design skills. So let's say you've got a fictional 3-player game, and I want to get $5. So I play red, so obviously I'm all the way on the side with the red there. So here's 3 ways that the game could let me get $3. So one way is maybe there's an action where I just take $3 from the bank. Now, assuming that the bank can never run out of money, this is totally personal scale. So I take the $5, I put it in front of me, and now I've got $5, but I haven't affected the other player's game states one bit. Of course, there may be implications to my move. Maybe down the line, that $5 will let me do something that does affect the other players. But for the purposes of this description, we're just going to look at the immediate effects of the $5. So that's personal scale. Now, perhaps there's the space in the middle of the board that says I can move my pawn and take $5 from the bank that way. And if I do that, the other players can't take $5. That's global scale, because I've just affected the game state for everyone. So not only have I taken $5, I've deprived the other players equally of the opportunity to take $5. And again, this may affect different players different ways, but overall, the effect is a global effect. And the third one is adjacent. Maybe there's a way that I can take $5 directly from someone else. So in this case, I've done just that, and the poor yellow player is down $5. I am up $5, and blue is completely unaffected. So again, you're going to see that this is either the trading or the take that model that we've seen in other games. So speaking of those other games, we can run through them again with this personal, global, and adjacent model that we have, with Milborn having a mix of personal adjacent scale, but very little global scale. Either you're improving yourself or you're hurting out. Either you're helping yourself or you're hurting one specific player. Bonanza, on the other hand, is similar, but you're either helping yourself or helping one particular player. Seven Wonders is almost completely personal with just a hint of adjacent scale. Take It Easy, completely personal again because you're working off your boards. And then when you get to Catan and Munchkin, you've got a mix. Catan has the global dice rolls with adjacent trading, with a little bit of personal state, but not much. You have some cards you have in hand. And Munchkin, you have a global opportunity to negotiate, which winds up with adjacent trading. And again, very little in that is personal. So I find this model really, really useful to work with because I find that there are real implications to these game states, like games that have a lot of personal state tend to scale really, really well via player counts. So that's why you see games like Seven Wonders saying they can scale from 2 to 7 players because it has so much personal scale. Whereas you see other games that say this really only works with 4 players because it's got such a specific balance of scales, between adjacent and global. A lot of times a game with global scale, it counts for the specific chaos of a certain player count. And if you don't get that chaos, the game does start to suffer. So I find the scale model really, really helps me. So knowing all this now, when do we go indirect? When's a good time to go to indirect interaction? Well, a lot of it depends on your theme. I think your game should do what it says on your tin, and I think you set yourself up for some unintended dissonance if you have theme and mechanisms that don't match up. Like, for example, if you have a game about, say, koi ponds or cake baking or farming, and your game is all about blowing the other players up, there's a dissonance there. And I'm not saying that dissonance is necessarily bad. If you're conscious of it, you can play off it. It can be a feature of the game. But if you're not conscious of it, if you're just sort of arbitrarily mashing the two together, you're going to get players who are going to be very confused over the first couple of rounds. I speak from personal experience here that it can be a really awkward thing. On the other hand, if your game promises some sort of direct interaction, perhaps it's got pirates or zombies or soldiers or, what do I have here, dragons, a lot of those do imply conflict and fighting, and if the game winds up being a dry auction game, you wind up with a little bit of dissonance again. You wind up promising something and giving the players a different experience. There's a Knizia game called Zombiegeddon that's a reskin of a game that was about hunters and gatherers. And it's a very strange experience because it's supposedly about zombies, but it plays like this very dry Knizia game. And to me, it's one of my hallmark examples of some unintended ludonarrative dissonance. So I'd say in terms of indirect interaction, listen for your game, be the game whisperer, and look for the kind of game that your theme is calling for. Also, if your game has very indirect or zero-player interaction, keep an eye on the clock because a lot of times your game state is going to be very, very small, especially with a lot of roll-and writes. They work because they're 20 minutes, but if you wind up with, say, a 90-minute or a 2-hour roll-and write, you can get players going a little stir-crazy because of that. So player interaction is really, really good at providing really surprising changes to the game state. So if your game is a little long, the longer it is, the more likely you're going to want some form of interaction in there. And I think this is where we want to bring out some Stefan Feld games, because I think he's a fascinating example. A lot of his games have very personal game scales, and most of the game is extremely personal. Looking at games like, for example, Notre Dame is a great example of a game that is, again, almost completely personal scale with very little you can do to affect the opponents. But the reason he can extend the game over an hour is because the game is very mean to you. And the game can do all sorts of nasty things towards you. And that's a hallmark with a lot of his games, is that while the players don't directly interact with one another, the game certainly gets up in your face. And I think the reason his games get away with that is because you don't have the players interfering with it. There are some games that have players interfering with each other and the game interfering with each other, but it's very hard to pull that off. Like, only Splotter I've seen can really get away with stuff like that. With a game like Antiquity, for example, is a game where the game is very mean to you and the players are very mean to you. But that's a game that has a very niche appeal, and there's not a lot of, it's not exactly going to be a mainstream game. So it's something you're going to have to watch out for. If your game has a lot of direct interaction and the game is out to get you as well, that can wind up being a little bit cruel. How important is planning in your game also? That's another consideration. If you wind up with a game where the real meaning of the game is that you're planning over the course of several rounds, and then somebody just gets in with some adjacent scale and blows up your plans, that can wind up being frustrating, and not in a good way. And it depends. If if you've heard Cole's talk, he talked about some examples where you could get away with it, like how High Frontier can get away with it, for example. But a lot of times this can be bungled, and it's very, very easy to do that, to have a game that on one hand incentivizes planning, and on the other hand incentivizes players to mess up each other's plans. So what's the incentive? Like, what's the game experience? What are you trying to get us to do? Because if the fun is in the planning, then let us plan, and don't mess with our planning. So the more planning is in your game, the more likely that indirect interaction may be the way you want to go. Again, this is not an absolute rule. There are going to be tons of exceptions, but it really all depends. So I think another good thing to look at is psychographic profiles, because this comes down to what kind of players are out there. Like, what do people actually want in games? Because players aren't monolithic. There's not this one single scale of this is fun, this is not fun. I'm sure as game designers, you have all found games, some players that do not enjoy the games that you find incredibly fun. So this is a psychographic profile that the folks at Magic, especially Mark Rosewater, the lead designer over at Magic, have put together. And there's a ton of psychographic models in addition to this. Quantric Foundry has an amazing model. My friend Chip Beauvais has a very sophisticated model with 6 personalities, but Magic has boiled it down to these 3 personalities. There's one named Timmy or Tammy who wants to experience something. There's one named Johnny or Jenny who wants to express something. There's one named Spike who wants to prove something. And those are the 3 basic archetypes that they found. And over time, they've refined this model. They look at hybrids like a Tammy and Jenny hybrid, for example. They have some extra models, like they have a couple of new ones like Vorthos and Mel, who are more into the mechanisms of how the game works, or the socializing around the Magic Circle. But I think studying why people play games will give you a better understanding of whether indirect interaction is really good for your game. Because that way, if you understand that playtester X, well, you know, this playtester X is totally a Tammy over here, and they really want to they really want an experience over here, but you want a game that's more about mastery than experience. Well, now you know how to filter their feedback. Not to say that you should ignore their feedback, but you know where it's coming from. And a lot of times it's so much easier to process playtest feedback with that. So in terms of indirect interaction, knowing why people are playing is so important, because ultimately it comes down to this. There's a big button that your game offers that just has meaning. And for a lot of us, that meaning is fun. But Doesn't always have to be fun. The meaning button, when you hit it, could release anger. It could release exhilaration. It could release frustration. It could release a whole dizzying set of emotions, from laughter to pure seething rage. But no matter what, there's some sort of meaning that your game has to deliver in order for your players to find the game valuable and interesting. Indirect interaction, to me, is one way that I find I can best get meaning out of my games, both the games that I enjoy playing and games that I design. Now, if it turns out that the meaning button for you is going to be something that you're going to need direct interaction for, by all means, put that meaning button in and let players hit it by like attacking each other. That's totally fine also. But knowing how and what your meaning button delivers, I think, is very, very important. Ultimately, it comes down to what kind of game are you making and who are you making it for. And that's pretty much everything I'm here to talk about. If there's any questions, we have a few minutes for questions. Please line up to the microphone right over there. And tell me your name and where you're from. I'm going to steal that from Cole.
Thanks for your great talk. My name is Ira Fay. I teach game design at Hampshire College.
Great.
I appreciated your model, or your friend's model, on personal, adjacent, and global scale. I was curious to hear you say that Seven Wonders and Notre Dame, which have a drafting mechanic, is only personal. So I'm wondering if you could speak more about drafting mechanics and how that would
yes. So the question is Notre Dame and Seven Wonders, which have drafting mechanisms, and do they really have a personal scale? Well, the focus of the game, I think, is the personal scale, but there's absolutely an adjacent scale in the drafting. But it's not as impactful, in my opinion. The drafting mechanism is important, but there's only so much you can do to hose the other player. Like, for example, in Seven Wonders, if the player to your left is collecting science, and you get 2 science cards in your hand, there's not a lot you can do. You can't get rid of 2 science cards. You can only get rid of 1. So it doesn't give you as much freedom to really mess with the other player's game states. So that's why I really look at it as mainly personal, but obviously this is not something that is absolute. Like, it's not like a game can only have personal scale or only adjacent scale, etc. So it's a mix, but to me the dominant feature of the game is the personal scale.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hey, Gil. You knew I was going to ask a question.
Yeah, please do.
So, as I listened to your talk, there is this weird point of communion between our 2 talks, which is you want to be clear with prospective players about what they're going to get.
Yes.
And that seems like such a simple thing, but as I was listening to your talk, I was sort of wondering how we actually do that communication. Because if you think about the critical discourse around games, like a game is brilliant, or it's not brilliant, or it's really good, or it's not good, it's an 8 or a 10. And that doesn't really speak to any of the things that actually really matter when it comes to whether or not a person is going to like a game. And so, you know, as someone who has brought games to market and knows that song and dance, like, what are the ways that you go about communicating what you're offering to your players? And are there things that you try to avoid for that reason, so that they don't get the wrong idea about the game that you're offering them?
So Cole's question is, what do I do as a designer and publisher to communicate the possible experience, the potential experience for players, and how can I best advertise? And this is so important for publishers, I think. And there's a bunch of ways you can do this. Obviously, the artistic style is the first thing. You know, I've seen games that are about they have art that's very kid-friendly, and the game turns out to be a 2-hour resource management game. And that's, to me, that's an example of unintended dissonance. I certainly fell into the trap myself once. My game Battle Merchants was originally about fighting robots, about building and selling fighting robots. You see, I did it right there, because I would go to people and say, hey, do you want to play my game about building and selling fighting robots? And they would say, sure, I'll play your game about fighting robots. And you see, there's a difference there. It's a little difference in expectation. And they would enjoy the game by the second round, but that first round was all dissonance. Like, that's not what I expected. So art, theme, just understanding, a lot of this is socialized, you know? It's not like it's an absolute thing. At some point, you know, we have come to understand that when we see like this very light medieval fantasy theme, we know that there's going to be like castle building and cubes and pigs and that sort of thing, and brick and some weird ingenious German mechanism that will somehow convert resources into VP, and we're okay with that, you know. And I think while there's a lot of room to innovate, if you innovate too much, or if you're unaware of this sort of meta language that's kind of been built up, you really do risk this dissonance that can wind up sinking a game. It's 4:19, so I can't talk about Monkeys on the Moon, which I'd love to do, but I think we should go and take it to the wrap-up room at this point. I'd love to talk more about the subject. I could talk about it all day. Thank you, everybody who came over. This was a lot of fun.